the last film to end shut up with the Skywalker saga. It's not the damned Skywalker saga. Congratulations for having the foresight to get ahead of the game with our myth's best interests in mind. Congratulations, Mr. Iger, for being completely out of touch. Earlier today, when I saw the news break that Game of Thrones had won an Emmy, I was reminded that Hollywood will never stop celebrating their own failures, turning inward, constantly feeding their own egos with their own flatulence, and instead of reaching outward and trying to figure out what people actually want. It is time to recognize that they will never listen. They won't listen because they simply think that they are right, and they want to continue to preach. They have been pampered so much that they are completely out of touch. They haven't even stopped for one moment to realize how far away that they have come and continue to go. The two cliffs of the giant exploding ravine of ideology continues to separate, moving further apart as now we realize that we can't even clash lightsabers any longer. We're too far apart. A Force Ghost Jeremy says, this just proves everything we've been saying. George is Star Wars. I'm sorry, George, for how they've treated you and us. Because everything is wrong with Star Wars now. Everything that is Star Wars is wrong. They don't know what they're doing. You don't know what you're doing. You don't understand. You don't get it. And if you continue to keep smelling your own farts and just, taking in the participation trophies and assuming that somehow everything's going to fix each other, and somehow the Mandalorian will save it all, and somehow all of this will come together afterwards and we're all just going to be okay. No, I don't think so. I don't think so at all. I think this is just a catastrophe. This is a complete catastrophe. I'm not optimistic about Obi-Wan, and I was 2 years ago. I was psyched for it. I was looking forward to it. And I know they're going to destroy him. I know it's going to suck. They're going to make him into a side character, and it's going to suck. I know it will. And that will ruin it big time, because I love Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're out of touch. You're out of touch. You don't get it. You don't understand. You don't get the importance of Star Wars. You don't understand what it's done, what it could have been. And you could have made 3 movies about Han, Luke, or even just one with Han, Luke, and Leia in it. And I get that you want to start with new characters and, get the young people involved. But when you destroy everything else, when you destroy everything else in your... If I had a dime for every single time I said this, that I said that I was dying to know what George Lucas thought of Star Wars, I wouldn't be a poor man. This is incredibly enlightening. This is in accordance with Data Racer 117. I've been following this guy forever. This guy has been from December of 2017. He's been springing this and breaking this out and exposing all the hypocrisy that has been going on in Lucasfilm and anywhere. Bob Iger's autobiography came out today, and he says George Lucas doesn't like Disney Star Wars. George Lucas didn't like The Force Awakens and didn't like that we ignored his ideas for the sequel trilogy. Iger tries to blame George for not appreciating our hard work. Total hit piece. Disney expecting some sort of congratulations for turning Star Wars into a feminist piece of trash, basically. Instead of keeping in mind the importance of it and recognizing the things that Kathleen Kennedy said and owning up to the promises that Kathleen Kennedy had said. On George seeing The Force Awakens for the first time, just prior to the global release, Kathy screened The Force Awakens for George. He didn't hide his disappointment. There's nothing new, he said. In each of the films in the original trilogy, it was important to him to present new worlds, new stories, new characters, and that's what he's always said in every single interview, even the White Slavers interview. I mean, he just was like, they did a retro movie. That's what he was saying. It's like, that's exactly what they did. Like, I mean, going back to when JJ was first interviewed about it, the first thing he was thinking of was stormtroopers and X-Wings. I mean, that was, he wasn't at all thinking about what's happening with the story. He was thinking the only thing that was on his mind was the visual aspect of it, the aesthetic, the superficial qualities of this thing. I mean, this is just what, and JJ was saying that from the get. He was saying that from the get-go, and that's what George said here. There's nothing new. In each of the films, the original trilogy, it was important to him to present new worlds, new stories, new characters, and new technologies. Of course, and he said that in that interview, and he said that, I always want every single movie had something new and interesting, but still serve the story. In this one, he said there weren't enough visual or technical leaps forward. Of course, I mean, it's 30 years later. He wasn't wrong, but he also wasn't appreciating the pressure we were under to give ardent fans a film that felt quintessentially Star Wars. Like, no, you were trying to give an idea of what you think Star Wars is, and you didn't have someone who knew what Star Wars was under the belt. You shouldn't have jumped in. We all get that. You shouldn't have jumped into it you jumped into it too fast. And JJ's writer, I can't remember the guy who wrote Toy Story 3, I think it was, he says, like, give me 3 or 4 years to write a script. And JJ's like, I need it in 6 months, and that's where that whole thing fell apart. And that's where he had to grab Lawrence Kasdan and everything to do The Force Awakens. He wasn't wrong, but he also wasn't appreciating the pressure. Like, okay, fine, we understand that you're under pressure, but you didn't have to put yourself under pressure. You didn't have to get it out right then, did you? Or maybe you did. Maybe you're bankrupt and needing the money. I don't know. It's pretty silly. I mean, and I get that, but you should have figured that out. It's like you did it with the MCU. Could you have been at least somewhat respectful to Star Wars? We'd intentionally created a world that was visually and tonally connected to the earlier films to not stray too far from what people loved and expected. So you just gave a copy and paste job. To not stray too far from what people loved and expected, and George was criticizing us for the very thing we were trying to do. Looking back with the perspective of several years and a few more Star Wars films, I believe JJ achieved the near impossible, creating a perfect bridge between what had been and what was to come. And I mean, I understand that, like, it was a temporary fix, though. That's the problem, is that it's not timeless. It doesn't do anything for it. I mean, honestly, no one can do a better job than George. I'm sorry, and I'm biased, but George Lucas is the man. Without George, we're never going to get it back. It's never going to be the same. It's going to be this watered-down trash, and it's going to be like this way forever. It's just that's where we're headed, and that's what it's going to be. On George sending his outlines for the sequel trilogy, at some point in the process, George told me that he had completed outlines for 3 new movies. He agreed to send us 3 copies of the outlines, one for me, one for Alan Braverman, and one for Alan Horn, who'd just been hired to run our studio. Alan Horn and I agreed. Alan Horn and I read George's outlines and decided we needed to buy them. Though we made clear in our purchase agreement that we would not be contractually obligated to adhere to the plot lines he had laid out. George, you shouldn't have sold this thing, man. You shouldn't. Shouldn't have sold it. Shouldn't have sold it. Shouldn't have sold it. On George's new role of creative authority, like, I mean, why would you even think? Why would you sell it and think that they would even adhere, George? I love you, man, but come on. Seriously, you thought that they would just cow to you? Like, no, they wouldn't. They knew the things that it went through. They knew the catastrophic things that had been through with the prequels, and I love the prequels because they're still George Lucas Star Wars. It still feels like Star Wars. It still feels hopeful and fun. He knew that I was going to stand firm on the question of creative control, but it wasn't an easy thing for him to accept, and so he reluctantly